as we mentioned, farming was a very, very important issue during the politics of this time. And there was a lot of issues going on and a lot of reaction politically to the problems. You had unrest in the South, the Plains, and the West, which were the main farming areas of the nation. And basically, it was about prices and the ability of farmers to actually survive, making a profit, even a minimal profit, because many of them couldn't. And the reasons were many, and many of the reasons were these farmers, which oftentimes were uneducated people, simply didn't understand why they couldn't make a profit. You know, they couldn't understand why the prices of their goods kept dropping. And basically, it was two main things. One was overproduction. You know, the catch 22 of farming is that if everybody, if the crops are good and the weather's good and the soil is good, it means you can produce more crops. And if everybody is producing and doing their best and producing more crops, well, you have more stuff to buy. And there's only so much demand for these goods, so you can overproduce, which decreases the price because it's supply and demand. If there's an oversupply and not enough demand, then prices go down. So that was one problem, was overproduction. The other was international competition with lower tariffs, uh, foreign farming, foreign farm goods started coming into the country, and of course, oftentimes they were cheaper. Also, they complained about railroad rates and the middlemen. Railroad rates, which we talked about earlier, involved the rural railroad lines overcharging these farmers to deliver their goods to market as compensation for not making the profit or actually losing money in the more urban markets. Also, middlemen. It seems as though the middlemen were making any profit that was available because they would be the ones that would buy from the farmers at the railroad stations or at the point of departure, and they would buy it and then in turn transport it to the end point, which would oftentimes be maybe another middleman who would buy it from them, and then they would sell it to the either the end user or to a market to sell it. And finally, of course, as is always a problem, is the burden of debt. A lot of these farmers borrowed money to buy the land that they farmed, and when they don't make a profit, they are unable to pay back the debt. And of course, that results in losing their farms altogether. So they began to form groups, political, social groups, in order to try to find ways to resolve these problems they had. One of the first groups was the Grangers, or the Granger movement. They were farmer-owned cooperatives where the farmers would get together and kind of pool their resources and pool their goods and in order to stabilize prices and keep prices up. Instead of competing against each other, they would form cooperatives and kind of work together so they weren't undercutting each other. And also they pursued Granger laws, which were basically, it was their ideas that these are the laws that the government should pass in order to help them, including regulation of railroads and regulation of warehouse rates. Because one of the deals with overproduction, especially with farm goods that could last over time, like corn or grain, in order to keep the prices up, oftentimes they would store surplus grain in warehouses and wait for times when there's maybe a lesser crop, and when the prices are higher, they will release the grain. So, but the problem is the people who owned the warehouses knew this, so they knew that the farmers had to store this over surplus of grain and corn and things like that. Well, they would just charge exorbitant rates. So they're looking to regulate railroad and warehouse rates. Also, another group is called the Farmers Alliance. It was a creation of a group of farmers who aligned themselves much in the way the Grangers did as cooperatives. Also, what made this group distinct is they kind of embraced in certain ways, not completely, but black farmers. And so you had the Colored Farmers National Alliance, which helped attempted to help the black farmers in the same ways that it helped the white farmers. This group also welcomed women, and they did all the really many of the same things that the Grangers did. They fought the bankers. They fought. They argued for uh, money backed by silver instead of just gold. They fought the banks, as I said, the financiers, the railroads, the big corporations. They saw everybody kind of as the enemy. And then Texas had their own group called the Texas Alliance, which they called for the pooling of their resources, much like the others. The farmers come together and put their goods together and sell it at equal prices, and and kind of share the profit. Um, they also wanted a sub-treasury plan, which is a specially funded plan to where governments would pay for the storage of excess farm um, excess goods in government warehouses, and until prices go up or when there was a need for the supply. So the sub-treasury plan. So all of these things, these groups came about in order to kind of address the major problems that farmers had during this period. Here's a really neat little visual depiction of a pro farmers cartoon. Really, it's not really a cartoon, but it's a simple visual depiction of the importance of a farmer, that they were trying to make people understand how important they are. Up here you have in the upper right left hand corner, you have politicians. Down here you have um, in the middle right hand, you have somebody working. It looks like a railroad executive working, and then you have maybe a teacher or a lawyer in the lower left hand corner, and then all these other workers. You see all these workers surrounding these farmers. This farmer in the middle, and he says, "I feed you all. You all wouldn't exist. You all wouldn't survive without me. Yet y'all seem to not really care about me." And this was kind of the point the farmers were trying to make. Everybody was getting rich and getting fat and rich, and the farmers were suffering. And they wanted these people to understand that the farmers were important in society. So the farm policies and the farm issues began to manifest itself into the political process, and the farmers truly believed that neither the Democrats nor the Republicans really understood their issue, and were not going to address their issue because they felt like they were more concerned with the East Coast corporations and other oil and steel issues. And of course, back then, just like today, you had lobbyists, you had interest groups that were pressuring government to pass policies that benefit them. So they often passed policies that benefited industry over the needs of farmers. So they basically formed their own political party, okay, to challenge these Eastern financiers, these banks, these industries, the railroads. And the leaders of this movement were Mary Elizabeth Lease, Jerry Simpson, and a guy named Thomas Watson. And what they ended up forming was something called the Populist Party. The Populist Party. And they met in Omaha, Nebraska, and they formed, for the presidential election of 1892, what they will call the Omaha Platform. This is important because it is a very clear uh, platform that spells out specifically what they wanted the government to do to address the needs of the farmers. One was the sub-treasury plan, allowing the federal government to subsidize and pay for among other things, storage of excess agriculture. Also, unlimited coinage of silver. That puts more money into the system, and it allows them to more easily pay back their debts. And a progressive income tax. An income tax that basically taxed higher levels of income at a higher rate than lower levels of income. They saw this as a way to at least place some of the burden on these financiers, these rich bankers that made a lot of money. Also, they wanted federal control over the railroads, federal regulation over railroads, especially the railroad rates. Also, reclaim excess lands from railroads and corporations, especially the railroads. Much land was given during the building of the transcontinental railroads. Land was given to these railroads in exchange for the building of the railroads, and a lot of this land just lay fallow. It hadn't been sold; it was just there without use, and these farmers see this as um, useful land that could be used by farmers, and they wanted them to reclaim it from the railroads and the corporations. And they called for an 8-hour workday and immigration restrictions in order to, limit competition. Uh, so the Omaha Platform is the platform put forth by the Populist Party in the election of 1892. And the election of 1892 comes around. Grover Cleveland, who had lost to Benjamin Harrison the previous election, runs again against him. And in the mix this time is James B. Weaver, who runs for the Populist Party. James B. Weaver, the populist candidate. And in this election, Cleveland wins, but Weaver gets over 1 million votes and actually wins the Electoral College in 4 states. And this is a huge thing. It's very, very rare. It was probably more common back then, but it's very, very rare that a minor party candidate, or what we call a third party candidate, a candidate from not from the Republican or the Democratic Party, actually wins states, wins the most votes in a state. But Weaver, very likely it was probably Iowa, Nebraska, the farming states where Weaver received the most votes and actually won those states. So it just shows the importance of the farm issue in certain, at least in certain parts of the country. Now, as we mentioned, silver was a big deal, the free coinage of silver. That was kind of an issue that was real big for the farmers because it meant there would be more money in circulation. And when there's more money in circulation, the money is kind of worth less, which makes it, for people that owed money, it's a good thing. If if you're a bank and you loan people money, then they have to pay. You want them to pay you back at the same value of the dollar that you loaned it. And that was a burden on many of these farmers. So if you were able to print more money, it would make it easier for them to pay back their debts, the farmers. It was during this time, during the Depression of 1893, which was caused by the overextension of railroads. Many of these railroads, when they overbuilt and weren't able to find people who to pay for use of the railroads, many of them collapsed. People lost their jobs. They could not pay back their loans. And when you can't pay back your loans, the banks often go under. And then other businesses that are uh, tied to the banking or the railroad industries, they go under. So this created a very, very deep depression, economic depression. And the farmers, more than anybody, were devastated because they were once again producing bumper crops, and nobody had any money during the Depression to really buy a lot of their goods, and B, there was so much of it, there was an oversupply that they couldn't make enough money to even pay, at minimum, pay their bills back. And so you started seeing protests like Coxey's Army, which was a protest of pro-farmers, uh, uh, farmer supporters who marched on Washington. And of course, the people in charge always get the blame for, whoever's in office, get the blame for the economic issues. And so in the midterm elections of 1894, the Democrats lose big and the Populists gain 13 more seats in Congress. And so the focus during this time, and especially in the election of 1896, was silver and whether to have the money backed by silver or not. The silver solution, as they called it. So this was the free silver election. The Republican candidate was a man named William McKinley, who was a preacher and a very, very, very good speaker. And he would really know how to work a crowd. And he no, I'm sorry, the Democrat was William Jennings Bryan. I'm sorry about that. The Democrat was William Jennings Bryan, who was a preacher, pro-silver, a very good speaker, who could really rally a crowd. Um, and then the Republican candidate was William McKinley, who was pro-business, pro-banking, pro-gold standard. He did not want uh, the free printing of silver, or money backed by silver. Um, so so anyway, um, the election was that McKinley labeled Bryan as a communistic radical because of his policies of helping workers, helping farmers, and having an economy backed by silver. Now Bryan, because he was pro-farmer, he carries most of the West and the South. He wins the Western and Southern states for the most part because his policies reflect the needs of the Southerners and Westerners who are mostly farmers. But he just can't get it. He couldn't hardly win any states in the Northeast. Uh, uh, and but he attracted some voters, but not enough to carry the day. And McKinley wins. Most famously, during this period, during the primaries at least, William Jennings Bryan gave his famous, what we will call the Cross of Gold speech, where he just at the nomination convention, he just went on this rant um, against the issue of gold, and at the end he had his famous statement: we will not allow ourselves to be crucified on a cross of gold." And that ties in with the issues of gold and also his religious background. Very interesting character. Ran for president quite a few times. And just here's a photo of William Jennings Bryan, and it may very well be the picture or the speech where he did give his famous Cross of Gold speech at the Democratic nominating convention.